Hello, and welcome back to Venus Rising. I'm your host, Callie Bell, and today I have the pleasure of having Stephanie Winn back on the show. Now, if you've missed our first discussion, I'm going to encourage you to stop, go back, and have a listen. But if that means you're not going to come back to this episode, don't stop. Listen to this because this is going to be on a different topic. We're going to have a lot of fun today. But I do, regardless, go back and have a listen to our first conversation. If you have listened to Stephanie on Venus Rising or any other podcast, such as her own, you know that she is amazing. She has so much knowledge. During our first show, Stephanie talked with us about how she became critical of the gender identity industry. And I knew we needed to have her back. So thankfully, Stephanie is generous with her time and her talent and has agreed to join me again today. Today, though, we are going to be discussing a new film that she's a part of and actually appeared in titled Affirmation Generation. And just as a brief way of introducing Stephanie, for those of you who don't know, allow me to introduce her again. Stephanie is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's a writer, consultant, and host of the podcast, You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist. In Oregon, Stephanie has a small online private practice called Real Talk Therapy PDX, offering therapy without ideology. We also talk about that during our first episode. Both in her clinical work and in her writing, speaking, and consulting, Stephanie has increasingly taken an interest in the unique mental health needs of victims of gender medicine. And that's a little bit about what the film Affirmation Generation is about. So let's, without further ado, Stephanie, thank you for coming back on the show today and talking to us about this new film.
Thank you, Callie. I'm so glad to be here. I really enjoyed our first conversation, and it's great to talk to you again.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback. People were excited to hear from you, and I think excited to know you are coming back. So, all right, Affirmation Generation. I had the privilege of watching it this weekend, and it parallels nicely, which we'll also talk about with a documentary I helped write and produce called The Detransition Diaries, Saving Our Sisters. And then, in fact, we had one similar character, Kat. She appears in both films, but your film covers a lot of topics within the realm of transgender ideology. So why don't you give us a little snippet about what folks can find or what they should expect during this really informational film?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Kat Caddinson, very eloquent and deep, wise soul, if you ask me. I think she really comes across as such an interesting person in both films. Kat Caddinson is featured in this film, as well as 5 other detransitioners, three men and 3 women. As well as a whole range of experts, other therapists, physicians. We have Dr. Lisa Littman, investigative journalist Jennifer Bilek. So I was thinking about how our 2 films compare, and I love that with the Detransition Diaries, it's very heart-centered, right? That you have that subtitle, Saving Our Sisters, and your film takes this intimate look into the experiences of these 3 women, and it really focuses on the experiences of the women and the internalized misogyny, their discomfort with their bodies and where that was coming from and what their healing processes looked like. And that's this beautiful parallel, as you pointed out, with what we focus on in Affirmation Generation, where we do go into some of that depth in the experiences of women. We also explore men's experiences of detransition, and then we bring in that role of the experts. So the film starts off by looking at the controversy in the news, right? And there's this kind of rush of all these news clips, pro and anti-trans, just highlighting how dramatic the issue is in our culture right now. And then it slows down and it gets to know the experiences of these detransitioners. And similar to Detransition Diaries, the film kind of walks you through the different stages that some of these survivors of gender malpractice went through in their search for identity and healing and belonging, self-acceptance. And then we also bring in the experts to talk about what's happening from a psychological lens, what do we think is happening with big pharma, and how does it all come together to affect these vulnerable people?
Mm-hmm. I like in the film with each of the, and I really hate using this word. I did an interview recently with someone who had detransition and they also hate the word. I hate the word detransition. I wish we had a different way of saying it, but I like in their in the film how you have a unique component, which is the vlogs or the video blogs of some of them, and it kind of shows they were encouraged or pressured, it sounded like a little bit, to do these video blogs during their transition. So while they were taking on testosterone, like, oh, this is day 6 of testosterone, this is day 7, and then through surgery, and then how some of them actually kind of kept it up through their detransition experience as well. And I thought that was a really powerful component of the film to see, even though it's small little bit. I really liked that.
Yeah, as you bring that up, I'm thinking about Joel. He was the
Yeah.
main transitioner who focused on that. And there was that record of I don't know if they were TikToks or Instagram posts, but you see these videos that he made while he thought he was a woman, videos in which he's covered in makeup and proudly announcing that it's been, 6 months on estrogen. And you can see the like count, the little, the heart and the numbers. And he talks about how receiving that so-called affirmation socially online was a part of his process. But then you see the mask drop and you hear him talk about, and content warning for those who need it. Obviously this is going to be a heavy conversation because we're talking about survivors of malpractice here, but he talks about the eventual suicide attempt when he started to realize what a mistake that was. Yeah, it's interesting that we highlight that social affirmation component. And there's a segment, I believe, I might be wrong about this, but I believe the music for that segment was actually put together by one of our detransitioners, Laura Becker. She goes by Funk God. She's very creative. But there's this whole section in the middle where it shows all these clips of what it's like to be a trans-identified or questioning teen on TikTok, Tumblr, Instagram, and Pinterest. And you can really see how, of course, when you're young and vulnerable and you're grappling with puberty and identity and belonging, of course, this stuff would be really seductive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's another to uptick on a positive note there, because that is really depressing what you just said about how seductive it is. But a similarity between both films too is Kat is also very talented, and so she did a musical portion in our film, and so it's great to see these girls or women, sorry, these women using these creative outlets now and being a part of the filmmaking process and using their songs. And you can find, I think, both of them on different musical outlets like iTunes or whatnot. But I loved that song in the film, and I did pick up on that. I was like, this is great. These women are very creative.
Absolutely. And that's just one of many components that I think you and I both want to help people understand about the detransition experience. For many women, the changes to their voice are very emotional and constant reminders of what they've been through. And with Kat, she's always been a singer, right? And I honestly, because I've watched both of them this past weekend, cannot remember if it was your film or mine that covered, or maybe it was both of them. I think it was yours though, because yours goes into her story a little bit more. But where she says that there was a point earlier in her life where she wanted that deeper voice, right? She had a very high range. And so she was looking forward to the changes with testosterone, but then there came a point where she just couldn't sing anymore. And I've heard
air came out. It was just like squeaks. Yeah.
Yes, I remember that from your film.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen her talk on social media about how she prayed for her voice to come back, and it seems like she's now at a place in her healing where she's singing again.
Yeah.
And she's, she doesn't have the same range she used to, but she has a new range that she's found and made her own. And I love that Kat can be a role model for other detransitioners by showing that healing is possible and that you can still find your voice and still find ways to express yourself creatively.
Yeah. you touch on so much there. I'm a little bit of a cat fangirl. So whenever I see her in the wild, so to speak, I'm like, okay, stay calm, stay calm. And I think the reason is because there's something attractive about people who are resilient and know how to heal and know and claim, like, I've been in a tough spot, but you don't have to stay there. And like you said, I think she is a great example of not just transitioning and detransitioning, but just as a whole in the human experience, and then also I love her music. My daughter and I, we love the song she wrote for us, and I bought it and we listened to it in the living room, dance around. So I'm just a huge cat fangirl. But I think Grace talks about that in our film too, as well, about just the human resilience. And then you talked about that in our first episode together, about the role of therapists to bring out that resilience in a human. And in your film, you make the comment about, I believe it was you, that this, comparing like the suicide issue with the trans ideology and how they kind of push that, if you don't get what you want, then you threaten suicide, or if you don't get what you want, then you should just die. And you believe in, and you, like I said, you've talked about this on previous podcasts and also in this film, the resilience of a human, and how that's the therapist's job to kind of pull that out. And do you want to talk any more about that, since you brought that up again?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that what you're talking about might have been the very first thing that really drew me to learning about detransitioners. I mean, first, just learning that they existed. Of course, I had to know more, right? I had to see the other side of the trans story.
Mm-hmm.
But, and Lisa Marchiano talks about this in Affirmation Generation. There's a section of the film where she talks about the idea of shadow people, and how Jung said that the shadow is any part of us that we really don't want to know about. And Lisa says that detransitioners are holding the shadow for society. They are, to put this in my own words, they're kind of burdened with bearing those things that the rest of us are refusing to acknowledge. And if we were to stop neglecting the shadow collectively, everything would change very rapidly. I saw a statistic in the film when I was rewatching it this last time. There's a study that came out in 2022 that found that after 4 years, only 70% of trans-identified people were still taking cross-sex hormones. What does that mean? Well, that means 30% either detransitioned or passed away of some cause or another, right? So we know that the detransition rate is a lot higher than the activists want us to believe. And we don't know what that's going to look like in the coming decades. But right now, the collective resistance to looking at the pain and suffering and shadow that the detransitioners are holding is reinforcing their pain.
Mm.
But when I first started to learn about detransitioners, one of the things that struck me, that really resonated with me, is how resilient they are. As a therapist, it's my job to help people find the courage and grace to examine their shadows, especially when something that they're afraid to deal with is getting in their way of having what they want, or is keeping them trapped in pain and suffering. And that's often a very difficult job. But I've learned so much about human nature through watching people have breakdowns and breakthroughs, and watching people take leaps of faith to confront the unknown. And I've also seen the suffering that gets prolonged when people can't find that courage or grace or faith. And so when I started learning about detransitioners, I was immediately taken with this unique courage that they had. And I know some detransitioners will get mad at me for saying this. I've learned a lot through detransitioners getting angry at me, by the way, for saying the wrong thing. Like,
oh no.
I've been told off for saying, I don't want you to tell me I'm freaking brave or courageous. I had no choice, So, but I will just speak for my own experience, regardless of how it lands with anyone else. And I know that might sound insensitive, but for me, what I saw was, here is someone actually realizing that they've made a mistake, rather than maintaining their cognitive dissonance, splitting off their doubt, persisting and doubling down in their illusions, because that's what most of us do, right? And that's what I see as a therapist. Forget the trans issue, set aside gender, just in general. We resist looking at that hard stuff. And what I noticed about every detransitioner whose story I was learning from in the early days of looking into this issue was, oh, they have all hit this rock bottom where the mask has come off, the veil has come down, the illusion has crumbled, the bubble has burst, and they're facing that darkness, and it's terrifying. But what comes out of that is, I think that's kind of the silver lining of this whole crisis is that, and again, I'll come back to what Lisa Marchiano said about this, right? That suffering creates wisdom. So I look forward to seeing, I mean, there's a lot I don't look forward to seeing about where this crisis is headed, but one thing I do look forward to seeing is when all of these people who've been through so much finally find the courage to face that darkness and find a way through it, what kind of wisdom and creativity will they bless us with? I think they're, best case scenario, we'll see sort of a cultural renaissance from this.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back. First of all, I got goosebumps when you were talking and just very emotional kind of inwardly about the shadows, because I think that that's an important point. And I hope that everyone kind of listening understands that gravity that we have, that detransitioners are kind of carrying that shadow that people don't want to see, that we don't want to recognize as a society. Certainly not people who are almost like violently pro gender affirmation. They want to disregard those stories. And I think that's why these films, Affirmation Generation, Detransition Diaries, others like it, why they are critical, because they give a voice to the shadows, and we need to shine a light so they're not shadows, that they are, they're part of our society. They've hit rock bottom, so to speak. So, with that being said, man, I have so much I want to say. But with that being said, we've got some critical comments from folks, and also in our first film, Transmission, What's the Rush to Reassign Gender, that we didn't have voices. And I noticed Affirmation Generation doesn't either. So I want to know what your thoughts are on this, but or what you would say to those folks who are critical, like, oh, well, you don't have any happy detransitioners in your film. You don't have the 70% that are happy or haven't detransitioned. You don't have folks who are pro-affirmation in your film. Your film's not balanced. And I always kind of come at that with kind of what you said, like the shadows. We're telling the story of the shadows. That's my job. I don't care right now about those other stories. But what's your thought on that? If someone were to ask you, okay, so your film is very heavily focused on detransitioners and those who are critical of this ideology. You don't have anyone in the film who is a success story, so to speak.
I think doing this work in any capacity, being an advocate for detransitioners, whether as a therapist, doctor, lawyer, parent, teacher, whatever your role might be, if you take an interest in detransitioners and you start listening to them, there's a point at which you simply cannot believe anything anyone says about this idea of the happy trans person. And maybe I'm not speaking on behalf of everyone who shares my beliefs. I'll just speak on my own behalf. But you get to the point where you've seen so much, and I have heard detransitioners say, I am the supposed success story. Like, I was told that I was a perfect candidate for this. And and Abel Garcia says this in our film, Affirmation Generation. He says, if you had asked me, I would have told you I was 99% sure that I had no regret, that I would have no regrets. Right. So when you listen to these stories of people who were so convinced that this was the right way to view things and the right path for them, that they actually made these permanent changes to their bodies, and they're saying, I was supposed to be the story of how this made sense and look at how it worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
Then you start to just see other people who claim that it works for them as a ticking time bomb. And especially when you learn about the medical issues. Um, and I've even seen Blair White. So Blair White would be an example of someone who is critical of the trans industry, but says it was the right choice for me and I'm happy with my decision. But I don't know if you ever saw that interview between Blair White and Shapeshifter, where Blair, or actually, was it Richie Herron? I've seen anyway, I've seen Blair White interview detransitioners and learn things from them, and the look on Blair's face and the sense of like overwhelm and whoa, I need a minute. And I think Blair was like vaping in one of them, just like
Of
even as
course.
someone who feels like this was the right choice for me. Right. But, to think about the risk of heart disease, Alzheimer's, dementia,
Dementia. Mm-hmm.
like, so it gets to the point where you just can't really be convinced anymore. And I know that not everyone shares my beliefs, but I think a lot of us in good faith are looking for examples where like, prove me wrong.
I think that that's a great consideration, that Abel's story. A lot of folks that I have talked to, they do say, they're like, oh, you're perfect. Helena in our film, she also has shares those same sentiments, that she was the perfect candidate for this. And I'm just going to give a shout out. Abel came on our Venus Rising to tell his story more in depth, so folks can go find that on iTunes or Podomatic or wherever you listen to podcasts, or on YouTube. But he shares his story, and Affirmation Generation, he does say, I was 99% sure I would never change my mind. And Hoxie, I'm thinking of too, he's a detransition man in our film Transmission, What's the Rush to Reassign Gender. He says, I would have thought I was living on one of Saturn's moons before I would tell you that I was masquerading as a woman. And so just how sure they were of themselves that this was the right thing to do. And not only that, how they had people kind of behind them saying, yes, this is perfect for you. I can see that as an outsider, that this is good for you. But I want to jump back because we talked a little bit about Joel and his videos, and one of the most or video vlogs, one of the most impactful parts of the film for me, for Affirmation Generation, was when Michelle, who will also be featured on Venus Rising coming up, or yeah, she'll be on our show, so pay attention. But Michelle, there is a point in Affirmation Generation where I think you show, I don't know if it's a video blog of her or what, but it shows her double mastectomy. And even in that video, at that moment, her facial expression is just so powerful. And then Michelle is watching it again in real time, kind of in Affirmation Generation. And she talks about that, and it kind of just cut scene. And that was so powerful. That was like the most powerful moment of the film for me. Do you have a part in the film when you watch Affirmation Generation that you're like, this is why I'm in it, this is why I'm promoting it, this is so powerful?
Well, let me just say, I'm glad you noticed that, because the last time I rewatched Affirmation Generation, I was also paying attention to Michelle's facial expressions in that video. And you think about the ways that people split off their doubts, right? And actually, if it's all right with you, rather than answering your question, I want to go back to your film, Detransition Diaries. Is still thinking about your last question about what about the happy trans people. I think one of the reasons that it's hard to believe in the idea of a happy trans person after you learn enough about this issue is exemplified by some of what Grace said in your film. She talked about how the dysphoria moves around, right? And some of our experts in our
Yes.
as well, they talk about how it might start with, I want my face to look more masculine. I want my voice to be deeper. And then it's, oh, I need to get rid of these breasts. And Grace shared how after she got rid of her breasts, it's like, oh, but now my hips are too curvy. And I think that that's the danger, right? Is that because you cannot change sex, it's not possible to change every chromosome in your body. Um, this idea that you'll ever be satisfied is so illusory
Mm-hmm.
for most people.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then, the fact that it's only a matter of time before you have some sort of chronic pain or disability as a result of these things. So I thought that was a powerful feature of your film, and ours covers that a little bit too. There were just so many good moments in Affirmation Generation. I'm going to have to get back to you about. But I had so many good ones where I just felt so proud to be a part of it.
Yeah. So who's the film for? Like if you is this film for parents? Is this film for those folks who are doubting themselves? Like who's your target audience, or is it just anyone?
I'm glad you asked, because it's really important for us to get this film before the right people. Yes, of course, it's for everyone. We want everyone to watch this, but yes, parents, we have, I understand that this episode we're recording right now might not come out for a few months. You and I are recording today before the film has been launched to the public. So things might change. The status of the film might change by the time this reaches your audience. But right now, in that initial phase of planning who we're trying to reach, we have thousands of parents just waiting to see the film. Those parents of youth with rapid onset gender dysphoria, or parents whose families have been disrupted by this, are some of the people who have been the most impacted. And so, groups like Parents with Inconvenient Truths About Trans and GenSpect and Partners for Ethical Care. Of course, there are large audiences just waiting for all the information they can gobble up on this subject. But we're also really trying to reach politicians. We've kind of internally debated how much we want to try to find ways to bring in people further left on the political spectrum, because right now things are so polarized that it's only politicians on the right who will talk to people like me and detransitioners and watch films like this. And so, of course, we have a more willing audience on the right. That doesn't mean that's how we want it to be. We have Lisa Selin Davis talks about this, right? Talking about needing to bring in our, fellow liberals on the left. So, of course, politicians on the right will probably be more open to this, but we really want to do a lot of world bridging and extending the olive branch and saying, hey, this is for all of us. And let me just comment on that for a second. Really, anybody who holds classic or even more modern liberal values needs to learn about detransitioners. If you look at what people on the left claim to be about, what values they consciously believe they hold, it's all about supporting the marginalized, right? It's all about championing the underdog and the victim and creating a more equal and fair society. Well, if you carry those values far enough, then you have to pay attention to detransitioners. It's a bitter irony that the very same people who are talking about championing the marginalized will turn around and say, oh, detransitioners are such a small minority that they're an insignificant part of the population that we shouldn't pay attention to. It's like, well, which is it then? And I mean, we know that's not true. Like I said earlier, that statistic, we have reason to believe that, after 4 years, about a third of people are no longer persisting with the path of medical, trying to maintain cross-sex hormones. Now, whether that means they call themselves detransitioners, whether that means they come out publicly and say anything about it, we don't know that. But, we have every reason to believe it's a lot higher than this small minority they say it is. But even if detransitioners were a very small minority, since when does the left not care about minorities? Like, it's like there's such a lack of consistency with these values. So, what I would hope is to reach across the political spectrum. Yes, definitely working with our allies on the political right who are more interested in hearing what we have to say, but also reaching out to those on the left who value compassion and equality and justice and say, hey, remember when on the left we didn't trust big pharma? Remember when we didn't trust multinational corporations.
Right.
At what point does, just because Starbucks runs an ad featuring a non-binary person, now you think they're on your side and they share your values? Big pharma, sorry to say, is still duping you just like you knew they were
Yeah.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
So we really want to reach across the political spectrum and help people who share liberal values also understand that if you hold values of compassion, justice, and equality, then you need to pay attention to what's happening to this shadow, underdog, marginalized group of people. So yes, it's for politicians because we really want to support policy changes, and parents, teachers, because they have such a huge influence, and there's a lot of conflict happening over how the public school system should be run right now and what role teachers should have in the gender crisis. Doctors, of course, because they play a large role, and therapists. And of course, that's my niche. I really want to peak as many therapists as possible.
Yeah. I just encourage anyone, even if you have to do it like really late at night and you have to hide it from your friends and your family that you're watching it because you're kind of nervous, or you think you're going to hate the films. I just wish that, because I've watched things that I don't agree with and engaged in conversations, to get understanding. And I think that that's something that both of these films do. They provide just a story. They're just telling someone's story. And so I hope that people who maybe are going to think it's a waste of time, I hope they spend an hour and a half watching these films. And like I said, even if they have to do it in the dark and the secret, so that nobody finds out, I really do hope that we can reach across the aisles and just have a conversation. I think, and I can't remember who says it in your film, but we need to de-escalate from this war about this issue into a conversation. And as a filmmaker, that's the beauty of film, is that hopefully it provides a way to start a conversation. It's a non-threatening way of thinking about things. So I liked that quote in that film, like, de-escalate this from war to conversation. Lives are on the line. Like,
I believe that was Lisa Sellen Davis who talked about that.
I think so.
Natasha Ayad also spoke to that, how unfortunate it is that it's so politically polarized that it makes it difficult to talk about the issue.
Yeah. And you talk about a little bit big pharma, and so I want to kind of segue into that. Jennifer Bilek also will be a guest on Venus Rising. Actually, by the time this airs, she will have been on, so go back and listen to that podcast as well. But I love her, and she talks in this film, and I want to talk about this just for a moment. I know this isn't your area of expertise, but you can certainly speak to it. But in the film, they both kind of talk about in Transmission, What's Rushed to Reassign Gender hits on this more than our current film, but about the role of big pharma. And one of the things that people don't understand, or maybe they do and they're just ignoring it, is that once you medicalize a person, they've been on testosterone, they've had these surgeries, a lot of these individuals can no longer have children. So not only are they medicalized for life, in that they might need supplemental hormones, or they might need surgeries to repair whatever damage they did, paying into pharma and medicine, but they also might have to rely on, or I hope they don't, but they're setting themselves up to have to rely on third-party reproduction, or what we like to call at the CBC big fertility, or hashtag big fertility. It's just another enterprise that's making money off of the vulnerable. And Jennifer hits on this a little bit in Affirmation Generation, and this reproductive regret, and how we're just setting up folks to need another, to pay into another system eventually. Do you have any thoughts on that, or anything that you'd like to?
It is so tragic and disturbing. It's just criminal, and again, I'm thinking of what people have said in our film. Like Lisa Marchiano talks about how naive any adult must be in a professional role to believe a young teen, or even a young adult, let's say someone over the age of consent, but even someone at the age of 22, as Michelle Aleva was, right? When they say that they don't want children, how is someone that young supposed to know? I mean, look at all of our experiences. Anyone who's lived enough life to witness your friends, for example, going through that change. I mean, if you're in your 30s or beyond, you probably have an old friend who swore all throughout high school and college they were never having children. And then she hits 35 and it's like, give me a baby right now. I mean, everyone's story is different, and it's just criminal to take that away from people at any point before nature does.
Mhm.
Yes, there comes a point where the window closes, especially for women, but to take that away when people are constantly growing and changing is just, it goes against everything we know
Mhm.
about human nature and our capacity to have evolving needs and wants over time. And, one thing we touch on in the film, and I've touched on in other podcasts, including my episode that just came out, episode 39 with Matt Osborne, The Myth of the Magical Child, is the suicide myth. So we cover the suicide myth. Sasha Ayad speaks beautifully to that in Affirmation Generation. But, you know, when I talk about the suicide myth, one of the most dangerous aspects is that we're kind of allowing people to trumpet this idea that these trans-identified youth are at high risk of suicide just because someone on Tumblr tells them to threaten suicide. When in reality, if you really want to understand the complex dynamics around suicide risk and prevention, you need to take the whole lifespan into account. Teenagers can be kept relatively safe at home and are pretty resilient. But, when we take a young person and take away their future fertility, we're really affecting their long-term suicide risk, because we know that relationships with family and loved ones and having responsibility to children are some of the biggest protective factors
Wow.
for suicide, in terms of, long term, for people who are vulnerable to depression. So it's absolutely criminal that we're taking that away from people. And what's going to happen with when these young people reach their 30s and 40s and want a family and can't have it? It's an ongoing complex grieving process. And yeah, the idea that you can just, it's like, it's been said to detransitioners, there are people who will say, oh, if you regret getting your breast removed and you want them later, just go get implants. As if that's the same thing, right? As if that's not traumatic, as if silicone can replace mammary glands, right?
Right. And
And
breastfeeding, which was
yeah,
something that was discussed in Affirmation Generation.
yeah, and it's the same thing with the fertility industry. It's just so disturbing that people are taking away this kind of natural, God-given, if you will, ability, this miraculous ability to create new life, and putting it in the hands of an industry that'll charge you tens of thousands of dollars to do it in a lab.
Right. Yeah, it breaks my heart. And it's really frustrating to see that this industry has just become the answer to everything, and the laws that are coming out, the right to build a family or have a family, which Jennifer and I will be talking a lot on in this coming year. But it sets the stage for this, for letting or for allowing kind of just whatever to happen in the space of third party reproduction and assisted reproduction. And so it's kind of interesting to me that we've seen this big surge in medically transitioning and taking away young kids' ability to have biological children the natural way, so to speak. But yet we're setting up our laws to where they can access third party reproduction easily and without it's just, I don't know that it's a coincidence, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I don't want to sound conspiracy theorist, but
No, I feel the same way. By the way, in terms of my podcast, my reviews, my average star rating is 4.3, but it's divided entirely between 5-star reviews and 1-star reviews. All the 1-star reviews use the word hate. They accuse me of hate speech. They call me hateful. And one of them, that I found this entertaining, the title of the bad review was, "You must be some kind of conspiracy theorist." And it's like, It's like, what's that radio headline? Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. I mean,
Right.
just because you're a conspiracy theorist doesn't mean it's not true. At some point, like there's so many things that have been considered conspiracy theorists that we found out were true. I don't think I'm a conspiracy theorist by nature. I think I'm a critical thinker. I tend toward dissent. I think I'm a little less agreeable than the average woman. I think, I think that I'm skeptical.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and the profit motive gets thrown around a lot. It's a way, people accuse like the term grifter lately. It's like there's this whole like cohort of people on the internet, not a highly educated crowd who like just discovered the meaning of the word grifter, and now it's their new favorite thing to
It
call
is.
everyone.
It's hit. It's like so popular.
Yeah. Oh man. If you really want to learn about grifting, by the way, Maria Konikova's book, The Confidence Game, is really excellent. It helps you understand how actual con artists work. But no, I mean, they accuse people like me of being a grifter just because I try to find ways to monetize my work. Of course, because I have to like I can only see so many therapy clients in a week when I'm busy writing and podcasting. So of course, yes, I sell things on my podcast. They call that grifting, but it's like the irony that the same people who are so quick to throw around the term grifter are so unskeptical of people who have billions of dollars at stake here, and they're not suspicious of doctors advertising quote unquote top surgery on TikTok.
Right. Sometimes it just makes me really sad to think of where we've come, where you can't have um, just a conversation about things anymore. And it makes me sad in schools too. I feel like the educational system is getting that way, where academia used to be a place where you could really kind of figure things out and you could express differences of opinions and different ideas. And now academia is responsible for silencing people. And, I'm thinking of Colin Wright and others, but it does make me incredibly sad. And I have to remain hopeful, though, that it will change. And I'm hopeful that films like ours will help spark the change. I know that you have to be and remain hopeful as a therapist and someone who um, is not afraid to speak truth. Um, but it can be challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my position, it's funny because I'm a therapist professionally, right? And that's
Mhm.
maybe about half or a third of what I do. And then I'm also involved in the community of, public intellectual discourse. And a lot of the people I'm involved with idea exchanges with through social media are not in the field of mental health. And I feel like, as much as we might agree on many things, when you're not in a position of being responsible for other people's psychological well-being, you have a lot more leeway to indulge despair and catastrophic thinking and all of that kind of stuff. But, both for my own sake, but also for the sake of the people I work with, whether they're coming to me for issues that have to do with the gender crisis or not, I can't afford to go there into despair. I have to maintain hope because I have a responsibility to the person in front of me. Every single person who comes to me, every single session, doesn't matter how long we've been working together, how much they've been through, I have to maintain hope that some kind of positive change is possible for them. And so I have to maintain hope that some kind of positive change is possible for society. And I think also being a parent will do that too. I mean, I don't have my own kids, I'm a step parent, but I think anyone who's in a position of responsibility for young, innocent people, it's like no matter how grim your view of the world might be, you know that you want to believe in them and you want to help create the best future possible for them.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So where can folks, I know it's not yet done, where will people be able to watch this film? How can they access it?
Yeah, so by the time that this episode of Venus Rising comes out, you should be able to stream Affirmation Generation online at affirmationgenerationmovie.com. You can also follow Affirmation Generation on Twitter at 2022 Affirmation. You can follow Affirmation Generation on Instagram at Affirmation Generation. You can follow me on Twitter at Some Therapist, me on Instagram at Some Therapist, and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the status of where you go to watch it might change because we are looking for a buyer this year. So it might be on a particular network. If we make a deal, it might also end up on YouTube. The beauty of it on being on our website and on Vimeo is that we can control it, and there are a few upgrades we're going to be making to finish polishing the film after it comes out. We're just trying to get it out there as soon as possible because people want to watch it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to plug that you can find Transmission, What's the Rush to Reassign Gender, on YouTube for free. And you can find the Detransition Diaries on Vimeo. Unfortunately, we do need to recover some costs still of making that film. Making films is very expensive. Even short films and documentary films, it can be very expensive. So we are still on Vimeo, charging, I think it's like $6, and you get to view it for 48 hours. You can also gift the film. So if you want to give that film to someone, just be in touch with us and we'll give you a code that you can give a gift it to someone. And I'm going to plug, since this is my show too, that if you want to make a donation to the CBC to help us get it off of the paywall, as soon as we've recovered the cost for making the film, we're planning on putting it on YouTube for free access for everyone. So just reach out to me. You can email me or go to our website, cbc-network.org, make a donation, and in that, say why you're donating. That would be really helpful. But Stephanie, thank you so much for spending time with us again. Unfortunately, our time is coming up. Is there anything else that you'd like to say about the film at all? The stage is yours.
Well, let me add, there's no reason that anyone shouldn't go and pay $6 to watch the Detransition. I know we're so accustomed to so much free content on the internet, and I'm guilty of that myself. It's like, no, I don't want the thing behind the paywall. I'll just keep consuming things that are free. But really, it's just $6. It's very easy to pay, and support your independent media creators, right? Because one of the dangers of going for what's free is that it's what the algorithms want you to see. It's what big tech wants you to see. And when you go and pay creators, you are enabling people to investigate the things that really need to be looked into. And $6 really isn't much for most people. So go and support the Detransition Diaries, but also come support Affirmation Generation. You can find us again at affirmationgenerationmovie.com. I really can't say enough good things about this film. Oh, and if you want to watch the trailer before committing, it's only 3 minutes. You can find it on YouTube at Affirmation Generation. And I'm really excited to see what happens this year. We've got big plans. We're hoping to turn it into a series, actually. We already have ideas.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, we hope 2023 is a big year for, detransition lawsuits and for raising awareness so that we can really start the process of reckoning with the damage that's been done and beginning the healing process.
That's great. That's great. So, and if you want to hear more from Stephanie on different topics, I want to encourage you to check out her podcast titled You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist. It's a great podcast. She engages with folks that she sometimes doesn't even agree with. So it's a really informative podcast. Please check it out. You can find her podcast, her blog, her shop, and consulting services at www.sometherapist.com. and her counseling practice at www.realtalktherapypdx.com. Like she said already, I'm going to plug it again. You can follow Stephanie on Twitter at both at some therapist and at some_therapist, since Twitter sometimes silences people. So Stephanie, you can also follow her on Instagram at some therapist as well. I want to make sure we get all those plugs. Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on the show today, for promoting your film. I'm hoping millions of people watch it. And again, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Callie. It's been a pleasure.
Yes. I also want to thank all of our listeners and subscribers. May you continue to facilitate discussion, even with those people you don't agree with, in your own lives. And may you think beyond the masses.